Welcome to Wesley Impact, as we highlight some of the favourite shows over the year that was. Today we revisit the story of 2013 Australian Christian Book of the Year winner, Anne Fogarty. It's been over 3 decades since the Ash Wednesday bushfires, one of Australia's worst natural disasters. On February the 16th, 1983, 75 people died and more than 2,600 people were injured. Anne's extraordinary story of survival is detailed in her book, Forged with Flames. Join me as we revisit a story of survival and faith against all the odds. Anne, good to have you on the show.
Good to be here, Ken.
And you share that common Lancashire heritage in the north of England.
I do.
And look, when you left there, I mean, I don't think people will quite grasp this, but it was a big move to leave rural Lancashire, if you like, to go down to London, you know. That in itself was a big move. You went to be a nanny there.
I did, and it was a huge difference coming from a little country village going to a big capital city.
Yeah, I know that they sang about Lowry going down from the smoke of the north to the big London, you know. It was a big, big thing. Look, how did you come to call Australia home then?
Well, when I was working in London, I met my future husband who was Australian, who'd come over just for 2 years. And we fell in love, and he said, if you want to marry me, you have to come back to Australia. So I was so in love, I said, that's no problem. So
that was the deal.
That was the deal,
Okay.
And that was fine.
So how did you adapt to your new life? And I think that you went in a way to a smaller community, didn't you, when you came here?
I did, yes, just a small community in Victoria. But a lot of things were the same, but a lot were very different. I was a very reserved, shy Lancashire lass, and I couldn't get over how open and friendly Australians were, and I found that very daunting in the beginning. Just the wide open spaces, so many things that were different and that I had to get used to.
And speaking approximately the same language.
Yes, that was a big plus.
It all began as a very normal day. On that day when very soon you knew you were in imminent danger. Try to help us understand that.
Yes, it was very hot right from the beginning, so it was sort of an extraordinary start to the day, but it wasn't until later in the day when we lost all the power and we lost the phones that you just got a sense that something was happening. And then out of our kitchen window I could see the back of the bush and I could see smoke rising up, and I knew that wasn't good.
So that became something that would be so powerful. You had to protect your own children, your 2 girls, didn't you?
Well, I did. My husband couldn't get home. They'd put up roadblocks and I had no way of knowing where he was because I couldn't ring him. So it was my responsibility to look after the girls, which was very daunting and very terrifying.
Well, look, I'm just going to stop it there because we're going to talk a little more depth about that in just a few moments. Today's performer, Steve McPherson, regularly sings on the show, and he's chosen a song to highlight something of what we hope will come out of this conversation, and certainly comes out in Anne's story. It's the theme of hope of the world.
For the love poured out, the price of freedom. Let the whole earth sing, hear the praises rising. We stand in awe of what you've done for us. At the cross, the hope of the world. Forgiven. You made a way, you were our ransom. We owe this life for all you've done for us. At the cross, the hope of the world lifted on high.
Keith Garner's new book, A Word for the World, is now available. Dealing with the 4 themes of success, sorrow, society and spirituality, the 16 sermons in this book will definitely inspire and challenge you as you read. The book also includes a DVD featuring interviews with Nick Farr-Jones, Lee Hatcher, Tanya Plibersek and Margaret Somerville. For more information on A Word for the World, please contact us on 9263 5555 or at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
In my intro, I said that Steve was a regular on the show, and you can find details about him and his music online all this week. We're back with Forged with Flames author Anne Fogarty. And how did you work through this whole experience?
Well, I had one idea of God before this happened to me, and now I've got a completely different one. I did feel, if I'm honest, very abandoned and betrayed by God on the night. I felt so sure he would keep me safe. But at the same time, I just couldn't deny his presence everywhere. So I had to work that through, and I've realised that my idea of God wasn't what God was like. And that's good, because it's helped me to grow in my relationship with God.
And that accords really with that comment that you make, which is somewhere along the lines that, you know, there's no fairy tale ending to this book. And I think some Christians do live their lives as though it's all going to slip into place and it's got a happy ending. And I think that you make that clear, that it's not just about a fairy tale ending.
No, I think it's about a relationship with God. It's about a journey through life and growing and finding things to be hopeful about, finding blessings out of things that have been terribly hard. I mean, we'd all love a fairy tale ending, but very few of us get it. But life can still be really good without the fairy tale ending.
And if I can say this, I think that you back home, your mom is still alive and your family would have never believed that you were writing a book of the year and all of that kind of thing, would they? This very challenging experience has thrust you, if you like, into opportunities too, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and I sometimes have to pinch myself and think, I can't believe I've written a book either. But it's just wonderful, and I think that's God taking everything that's happened and just turning it around and making it a blessing for me and hopefully for other people as well.
You were, these are hard things. Nearly the whole of that year you were in hospital. And I know, I'm looking at these notes because I want to be sure they're the right figure. You were resuscitated 50 times on that road to recovery. Is that the right figure?
Well, it was actually over 50 times. They lost count, I think, in the end. But it makes me realise how much I'm meant to be here and how much the nurses and doctors put into keeping me here.
And did it give you a consciousness that there were people looking out for you, being concerned for you, but perhaps also that God was there looking out for you?
I think he was. I mean, as extraordinary as it sounds, all the time I was in intensive care, which was nearly 3 months, I could actually see an angel sitting in the corner of the room. So I think that to me was God's presence loud and clear.
Let me come back to something you said earlier now, in the light of what you've described. You said your understanding of God changed. What is the fundamental difference between before and after?
Well, I think I expected God to be just like a father who indulged his children and gave them everything they wanted and made life really easy. And I've realised now that it's not that at all. It's a real relationship. I think that's the difference. It's a real relationship with its ups and downs and difficulties and struggles.
But there's been some really exhilarating moments through that journey. In this book, you're in a way, you retrace the journey. Do you find that hard to do? Because, you know, when you're telling a story of 30 years before, you go back into it, don't you?
Well, you do, and there were times when I really didn't want to do it because I'd pushed a lot of things really deep inside myself. And to be able to write about them, I had to bring them up into my head and think about them. And I just found that excruciatingly difficult because I was feeling it all over again.
You were delving in the past, if you like, really, didn't you?
Yes.
What's the main message that when you're invited to speak somewhere or talk about your book, what's the main thing that you want to communicate?
I want to say never give up, because life can be so beautiful and hold so many extraordinary things, and you couldn't believe it could when you're struggling through difficult times, but it actually does.
And sometimes the more difficult and challenging the experience, the greater the lesson, really.
I think it is, and someone once said to me, to the depth you feel sorrow, that's the depth you will feel joy. And I have to say that's true in my life.
And you say your relationship with God has become more meaningful through this?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I'd be sitting here today in my right mind without my relationship to God. He's just been my rock. He's just always been there to turn to. Not quite in the way I thought, but that's okay, in a much better way.
Well, thank you for being yourself and reminding us that there is nothing that you ever journey through that you need to be fearful of, because God can be with you. But also that you've allowed your experience and your personality to take on a story that we all need to hear. So we're delighted about the book, that it's got this award, but we're more than delighted that the book has got an award, but that it's also given you the opportunity to tell that story on a wider platform. God bless you, Anne, and thank you for coming in here and sharing from your lovely self that story, which is so important. We'll be back in just a moment.
It's been 200 years since the first Methodists met in Australia. To celebrate 2 centuries of faith and pioneering care, CEO and presenter Reverend Dr. Keith Garner takes us back to where it all began.
But we don't begin here at the heart of London. We begin in a town in the north of England.
In this fascinating narrative, Reverend Garner chronicles the history of the life and times of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley. This fresh and thought-provoking documentary takes us on a journey throughout the United Kingdom, beginning in John Wesley's hometown of Epworth.
John Wesley was born here on the 17th of June, 1703.
This 1-hour DVD travels onto his education years and beginnings of social justice in Oxford, to his final years in London. For more information on John Wesley, the man and his mission, call 02 9263 5555 or email us at impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
This year we've celebrated the fact that Lifeline, which began at Wesley Mission, is 50 years in operation, and what better way to show our work than through the dedication of one of our hard-working volunteers. Andrew Downey was awarded the Order of Australia Medal in the Queen's Birthday Honours List this year for 30 years of service. Let's take a look at his story.
Hello, this is Lifeline. Can I help you?
My name's Andrew Downey. I'm a Lifeline volunteer. My first involvement with Wesley Mission was in 1971. I enrolled in the Lifeline training course, which was then run here at Wesley Mission round in Pitt Street. And so I did what was then a 3-month training course and started working for Lifeline, taking calls. The technology changed a lot over those years, mostly for the better, but for me the fundamental problem was that a telephone system was introduced that I couldn't operate because of my blindness. The buttons changed their spots, so to speak, and I didn't feel confident to be taking calls. The call sheet is central to being able to record the information that's necessary. And when I first was invited to go and have a look at it, I thought that it probably wouldn't be a huge task to fix it. My day job involves looking at web page code, so I spent a Saturday writing sample code for the developers. It provides Lifeline with counsellors who otherwise wouldn't be able to do the work, and it provides people who otherwise couldn't do the work with a way of contributing to society, and that's important. Social expectations of people with significant disabilities are still fairly low, so when I do fairly ordinary things, people say, well, isn't that amazing? It's only amazing, I think, because people don't believe it's possible.
The volunteer is the heartbeat of Lifeline. Lifeline nationally took over 540,000 calls last year, It's the most they've ever taken. Most of our crisis supporters will be on a 4-hour shift, and they'll probably take anything between 4 and 8 calls in a shift. The type of person that comes in to volunteer for Lifeline is a very special type of person. It's great.
I really appreciate the fact that Alan Walker and Wesley Mission started Lifeline. It's a huge resource for people in distress. Personally, it's been one of the privileges of my life.
I'm continuing my thoughts on the Old Testament prophets. Now, there is an interesting New Testament verse that mentions Elijah in James chapter 5:17, and I want to read it to you. Elijah was a human being even as we are. The very humanity of people is so important in trying to understand who they are. And sometimes some of the greatest people in the story of the world, in the story of Scripture, are very ordinary people who display extraordinary qualities. But when we study Elijah's life, he seems anything but a person like ourselves. He was a man of granite strength. There were times when he stood up against other prophets, other leaders, powerful characters, and held firm to what he believed, the kind of person he was. Granite strength. He was the kind of person that only emerged infrequently. You don't find Elijahs everywhere you turn. So now I'm going to read to you from the Old Testament, 1 Kings chapter 19, 1-5. In the light of all the positive things I've just said, let's hear these words. Now, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he'd killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I don't take your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servants there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. You didn't expect that, perhaps. I've been talking about extraordinary people who are really ordinary as they present to us, but extraordinary in qualities. But this is Elijah, man, as we've said, of granite steel. And yet, however, at the same time, he's a man who has all those qualities of strength. And yet here we find him running away. And I think it's helpful for us to see that this part of his life existed. We can see how in many ways James was right. He's just like us. You see, if weak people can become bold, it's equally true that strong people can suddenly become weak. Elijah had to face his own physical weakness, something all of us have to do. Gosh, didn't we enjoy listening, even though it was a bit painful, that interview just a few moments ago? Well, we heard somebody share out of their own experience how for nearly a year in hospital, 50 times, more than 50 times, resuscitated. Tremendously challenging experience. A moment that exposes our sheer humanity. Elijah experienced depression in what we might only call loneliness. Depression. You don't expect that in a prophet. You say that's what happens to weak people. No, not at all. Strong people can experience that. And many of us that have been down that road know it can happen in our lives. Such loneliness tends to discouragement and depression. But we can discover, as we heard just a few moments ago, that God can be with us through the most difficult of experiences. And the prophet also experienced failure, which can lead to despondency. So there are two things that I'd want to say from a passage like this and lessons that we might learn. Firstly, if it is a failure, then it's a high failure, which is infinitely better than a low success. To go through that experience of failure is something that is very difficult, but it can be very powerful. It can empower us, if you like, to live our lives. And secondly, the failure makes him very usable by God. And the chapters that follow tell us it was the pathway to a wonderful work. When you start turning the chapters of how the prophet is condemned by Ahab, and then we have the amazing stories of how he stood up for God in this prophetic ministry, we know that none of that would have been possible if he hadn't realized that as he goes through these moments of despondency, despair and depression, that God lifts him. God holds him in the hollow of his hand and grants him the opportunity to stand up and be there. Now, this morning, today, this evening, wherever you find yourself, you may find that there's a point in today when you feel down and low. Isn't it good news to know that God lifts us up? He's the provider of that sustenance for our life that gives us confidence. And if you're one of those people in life that is prone to depression and despondency, just be assured a lot of people have been there before you, and there's nothing that you can have to face in life that you have to face alone, and that you can find yourself lifted up from where you are and put on a new way, a new path, and a new opportunity in life. So here's somebody, one of those great prophets of the Old Testament, who really shows to us that it's possible to be a person who's brought down, lifted up, strong, weak, and all at the same time. God bless you today with his confidence and his grace.
If you would like to know more about today's topic, or for more on Keith's message, contact Keith by writing to Wesley Mission, Post Office Box A5555, Sydney South 1235, or email impacttv@wesleymission.org.au.
Thanks for joining us today. Here's Robin Green with I Will Arise. God bless you. Have a great week. See you next week.
I know that there are mountains I must climb, more valleys to go through, but my trust is in you, Lord. Raging storms may surround me, of worries and fears, but I shall arise in the strength you've given me. Because of you, I have hope tomorrow. Because of you, my heart holds no fears. Because of you, I can live in victory.